Hello, welcome to Math for All, where we try to make math creative, curious, and inclusive for everyone. I'm Molly Vokey.
I'm Heidi Subnani. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're really excited to speak with Brooke Powers, and we hope that you will follow along on YouTube or Facebook. I wouldn't follow us on Twitter because we're leaving, so don't do that.
But we're not really doing anything on Twitter, so there's not anything to follow, really.
Yeah. So don't follow us there, but follow us in any of those other places, and you'll know when we have a show coming on, and you can hear from amazing educators who share their knowledge and their insight with us a couple times a month. So please do that.
Yes. You can also find us at Math for All with all the links to all the things, including our book, Math Activators. And we're going to be talking to Brooke Powers today about this question: what could we learn from integrating math and ELA professional development? Heidi is very excited about this conversation because those are her two loves. Math is only her most recent love. So, and she and Brooke were at an ELA conference today. So let's hear all about Brooke. Brooke Powers is currently the Managing Director of Academics, Equity, and Social Justice at Open Up Resources. As a former middle school math teacher, she champions the idea that every student can excel with access to engaging grade-level mathematics that incorporates student identities. Brooke leverages her experience from teaching, designing and delivering professional learning, and creating openly accessible math and ELA curricula to craft inspiring and actionable presentations for educators and leaders. Her goal is to empower educators with practical strategies that foster equity, engagement, and academic excellence in every classroom. Let's bring her in.
Hi, friends.
Oh, hello. Hello. So this might be the first time ever that we have had someone on who has been physically seen in the same day that the show is happening.
We didn't actually get to see each other in person.
No, there was so many people.
Oh, you didn't?
No. Heidi and I are at the NCTE conference, National Council of Teachers of English, and we got to see Ketanji Brown Jackson speak today, which was amazing. But there were so many people there. We did not. I mean, we
tried.
We tried. Lots of lines, lots of waiting, but we're hoping to get together tomorrow.
All right. Well, I stand corrected.
Yes. Close. We were in the same space. We were in
the same space.
Well, you're in the same city too.
Yeah.
Pretty good. Pretty good. Pretty good.
So we love to start here. So if people don't know about you, they can get to know you a little bit better. What's your math story?
That's a great question, and it could be a dissertation, if I'm being honest. So it won't take you all the way back, but I grew up in very rural Kentucky, first-generation college student, and probably if there were awards for this in school, I would have been voted least likely to be a math educator when I was coming up. Math in my school district was very much focused on kind of an elite group, I would say, parents who were very involved, who were friends with the accelerated math teachers, those types of things. So I was never picked for those groups. My parents really wanted me to be, so they pushed hard. And, I think I got to take Algebra 1 in 8th grade, which was like a huge deal, but I still didn't really fit. It was a struggle for me. It was hard there. I didn't have a lot of support at home because, my parents were farmers. They worked hard. But they didn't go to a 4-year university. So they didn't have that background to help me. And really, I did good enough just to get by, but did not understand what I was doing ever. And that all came to a head in high school pre-calculus, where I think I threw the book across the room one day and told my teacher he was an idiot for being a math teacher, because why would somebody want to teach something that didn't make sense? And so definitely, I don't think it's what anybody thought I would end up doing. But long story short, I went to college at University of Kentucky and majored in agriculture because that was a way for me to get a lot of scholarships. But I was a young student. That was when there was no rules about when you could start school. So I started kindergarten at 4 and I was going to graduate college in 3 years. So I was going to be 20 years old and a college graduate. And, you know, my
Wow.
frontal lobe not developed yet. That did not need to happen. So I talked to my advisors and they said, you know, you're an agriculture communications major. You're really close to an agriculture education degree. So if you want to stay another year, you know, you can in the fall take all the methods courses, etc., student teach in the spring, and you'll have another degree. So I did it because I didn't want to graduate at 20. I thought, how can you not even be able to drink a beer legally, but be a full-fledged working adult? And so I went into student teaching with a terrible attitude of like, fine, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to go work in business. You know, I'm going to make all this money, do something in ag business. It'll be great. And I fell in love with the kids and teaching and knew that's what I wanted to do. So my first teaching job was actually as an agriculture teacher. And so I taught welding and woodworking and animal science and all kinds of awesome things in middle school right outside of Washington, D.C. in the Northern Virginia area. And I worked for a really innovative principal at the time, Terry Miller. I will remember her my entire career because I owe a lot to her. And I was really stressed about job security because our district was going through budget cuts and, you know, agriculture and electives are always the first to go. And she said, Brooke, you know, kids really get math in the wood shop. They can do fractions and they can do decimals when they're making things. Have you thought about teaching math? And you know, I was young and didn't have kids at the time and thought, sure, I'll go get a math degree. So I went back and got a math degree. And she gave me my very first job teaching 6th grade math. And I never really turned back after that. And once I became a math teacher, what I strive to remember is all of those things that made kids love ag class. So I tried to make sure it was hands-on and applicable and they were experiencing the math and not just me telling them. And so, you know, long story short, I ended up becoming a math teacher, had a lot of success. Years ago, my old district brought me back to lead professional learning on math. And if you could have seen my teachers' faces when I walked in the room, because I had a different last name then, and you could tell they were like, surely she's not going to teach us about how to teach math. She threw a calculus book across the room. So that was a fun full circle moment.
I love that.
And then as far as how I got to where I am now, I fell in love with the illustrative math / open up resources curriculum. I was the first person to actually ever pilot the very first unit, and I loved it. I taught in a really diverse district. I always talk about, I had a second period class that had 31 kids in it, and 28 were students with disabilities or multilingual learners or both. And they spoke 7 or 8 different languages, including a couple regional dialects of the Congo. And they experienced such success with the curriculum that I knew that I was really invested in it. Mm-hmm. Long story short, my district went through a formal curriculum adoption and picked a big box publisher and said, Brooke, you know, like, you can't use this anymore. We're going to be checking. And I thought I was a really big deal in like math teaching. And so I said, if I can't teach with this curriculum, I'm leaving, thinking they would be like, no, what can we do? Instead, they were like, it's been a great 13 years. We wish you the best. And so luckily, I kind of came to open up with this idea of like, what if we started open communities for the curriculum? What if we did that? And so they hired me, and I've been there now for 6 years, which has been amazing. And most recently, I am the opposite of Heidi. Heidi started in ELA and went to math. I started in math. And then as I came into my current position as managing director of the academics team, which oversees our math and ELA portfolios, and we had some key personnel leave. And I just kind of got thrown into the deep end of the literacy world and thought, I can do this. So I read everything, talked to every mentor, went to every free webinar I could to kind of embrace my literacy person. So I always say I'm in my literacy era now. This is my very first all literacy conference this year. Heidi, you'll appreciate this. I was laughing walking down the halls of NCTE today because I was like, this is so different than NCTM where I know so many people and I stop and talk. And here I am just an attendee for sure. So it's a whole different experience, but I've loved it and really have embraced kind of the overlap between my math and literacy worlds.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I was like, but like there are a couple of there. It's not just us that overlap. So Cassia will be there tomorrow. Like there's some other people who overlap, but it is definitely a totally different thing, which we'll talk about some other time. But yeah, I mean, it's always interesting to hear people's stories where they start and how that plays into where we go and not being so siloed. I mean, my parents had a career in a thing, and my husband's parents, like everyone of my parents, my godparents, all the generation, most of them stayed in the same career, like the same area, the same career. I mean, I had one or two who like switched, and it was like, ooh, but when we think about now, just like the opportunities and the interplay between lots of different like curricular areas and content areas, and how all of those things are really more connected than they were for a while, right? Like they were way back, then they became siloed, and now I feel like we have a better interplay between the two.
Totally agree with that.
It is kind of crazy, because when I first started learning to teach, it was very much like, try to do integration and gosh, what were the terms that were being used at that time?
Cross-curricular.
Cross-curricular. That's the one that cross-curricular.
Yeah. And it was, I ended up becoming a middle school teacher, which was not what I set out to do. I was trying to be an elementary school teacher, but for lack of job, I took a middle school position, and then you're pretty siloed. So
well, what I find interesting is, so same as you all. I mean, I can remember remember going to professional learning events or, different district mandates. And they would always say, well, you need to do a cross-curricular unit on your team, right? Because they wanted to expose kids to cross-curricular. But what I found interesting was they never exposed teachers to anything cross-curricular. So it's very hard to unsilo the kids if you haven't unsiloed the teachers from that.
Yeah. And teachers don't really, know how to do that. I remember like doing one single unit where it was like, okay, they're going to read this book and it's going to be about science. So science is going to participate. We're going to look at the history of that. And then what's the math? But like, no one really kind of tells you how to do it, really.
No.
Anyway, well, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it, right? So what could we learn from integrating math and ELA professional learning?
So this is something I've been thinking about constantly. Actually, what brought this to mind is last year, the first ever NCTE, NCTM joint conference, which once I got there and started going to sessions, I was like, man, this makes a lot of sense. Why aren't we doing this? The first reason it makes so much sense to me is when we look at how many teachers are K-5 teachers and teaching across subjects, but yet we totally silo them still in their professional learning. You're going to ELA professional learning today. Then it's math professional learning. Sometimes those have conflicting messages. Sometimes they don't, right? But
also sometimes you can only go to one or the other in your district, right? And then you're told which one to go to.
Or you go to the one that you already like and are good at because you don't want to get outside your box.
Yes.
So I totally agree with that. And even beyond, my job right now focuses on ELA and math, but even thinking around, you were talking about cross-curricular projects, even thinking about science and social studies and all of those things, there are so many pedagogical strategies that are just universally good. And so I see it both ways. Sometimes I see it where by putting folks together in a room and teaching both, we can learn from each other. And also what I find is sometimes these are the same strategies. We just call them different things and really confuse teachers by being like, no, you need to do close reading. No, you need to do 3 reads, right? Like there's a lot of overlap there.
We're not going to notice and wonder. We're going to notice and note.
Exactly. Right. Like, And also confusing to the kids because you have the same teacher using the same strategy and calling it different things when we do it in a different content area. So instead, like, let's really elevate what are these universally good pedagogical strategies, regardless of content area.
Mm-hmm.
I can even remember I did when I was still in the classroom, my principal had me do a, free labor professional learning day. Like Brooke will lead some sessions. Of course, I'm sure you all have been in that boat. And I actually led a Desmos session, which was funny because I marketed it to the whole school. But I ended up working with our social studies teacher, and I can't think the Guess Who Desmos activity. Do you know the one I'm talking about where the kids pick an image and they ask yes or no questions? We actually just kind of like hacked that system and we uploaded pictures of countries instead of shapes. And he used Desmos to teach a geography lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And then we did the same thing with like historical figures. And the kids loved it because they were like, we did that in Miss Powers class, but now we're doing it in social studies. But again, that's just a great instructional strategy that's not just reserved for math. I don't think the Desmos guys set out to make it a social studies tool, but we made it a social studies tool when we needed it to be. So those types of things I really think a lot about. I also find that when it is a different strategy, so a good example, a strategy I talk about all the time is one of the math language routines, stronger and clearer each time. It's my favorite one. If you're listening and not using it, Google it as soon as this is over. It's like think, pair, share, but better because it's follow up and accountability and reflection. But anytime I show that to ELA teachers, they're like, absolutely, we should be doing this, right? But they're not exposed to that if they're not going to a math professional learning about math language routines, which are not just for multilingual students, they're for all learners.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and it's not just for math. Like that's the thing about that list that's so confusing, right? Is like when we, yes, it started there, like from a research perspective, and the professor was doing it, and it started in ways to help multilingual or emerging bilingual or trilingual students, but those cross their language routines.
Exactly. Yes.
Right. But what's so interesting though, right, is that for very many years there was one way to teach math.
That's true.
There weren't multiple ways. You just went in, told them what to do, and they did it, and then they left. Yeah. So there were definitely lots more ways to teach the other subject areas. So it's almost like math is just discovering this pedagogy, like the whole world of math is discovering these pedagogies as if they're their own.
Right.
And
then
naming them and then saying, oh, these are great math strategies.
Yeah, exactly. We're totally gatekeeping them. And like, these were actually ours all along. They're math strategies.
Yeah. Totally even though we just discovered them 5 years ago.
And even when I obviously am a big fan of the math language routines. I talk about them all the time, but even those now I feel like because they were labeled on the math end as strategies for multilingual learners, they've been gatekept a little bit, right? Yes. I use them at every level of class I talk in advanced algebra because guess what? Those kids have trouble talking about math too. And so we might use them in a little different way and a little different purpose, but there's so much overlap between these things. And I think we just kind of silo ourselves out of that collaboration a bit at times.
So how do you see, I mean, Heidi's going to be able to maybe see this more clearly than me because she is, she focuses on both. But for me, I've been basically math my whole career, which I didn't really anticipate that. I really thought that I would be an elementary school teacher, being like one of these people that you're talking about that has, the separate moves for different subjects. But how do you see that this could be translated for teachers? Like just to start, like we met at the NCTE conference, right? But that was the first of its kind ever at the national level. So, obviously more of that, but how do you see that happening maybe at the district level or even at the state level?
Yeah, I think part of it is we have to stop we kind of have to start, we got to separate professional learning into different buckets, right? So we have been separating it into ELA professional learning, science professional learning, social studies professional learning. I think moving forward, we have to separate it into pedagogical professional learning, like pedagogical strategies, and then content professional learning, because those are different things, right? Some, you all know, even when you're at a conference, sometimes you go to a very content specific session because you want to learn about how proportional relationships progress over grade 6-8. And sometimes you go because you want to get better at questioning strategies.
Yeah.
So I think that's one way to think about it, is so that we are presenting more on pedagogical research, what moves the needle, what strategies are working, what's not working, rather than just specific content. This is how you get kids talking in math class. This is how you get kids talking in language arts class. So that's kind of the first way I think about it. But I also think even beyond that, there is so much power. So, like I said, K-5 teachers is what made me think we should be doing this more. But that's not to say that I don't think it doesn't work in 6-12 also. Because I think in 6-12, even though the teachers are generally more siloed and departmentalized, there is still such power in learning from each other. So like when I think about language arts teachers, right? Think about how much they do in the world of constructing arguments, writing critiques, critical thinking, analyzing. I am pretty sure those are all skills I would love my math scholars to have more of, right? So there are things I can learn from them there. My ELA friends, when I look at them and you think about the logic and structure of mathematics and organizing ideas and putting things together, like we all have those things we could be learning from each other. So, Molly, you started it perfectly when you were talking about these cross-disciplinary projects, right?
Yeah.
Again, we've only focused on doing that for the sake of kids, but we don't talk about facilitating those discussions for the sake of teachers. How do you get kids analyzing graphs in science class? I'd love to know when I teach 7th grade ratios and proportions and proportions.
Yeah, that is one. I taught science and social studies and math my second year of teaching, and there felt like more of an overlap between science, which I think is fairly natural, but it definitely needs to be something that districts focus on, in their department, not their department meetings, their whole school meetings, right? I mean, those are really, we really can leverage so much from each other. And even
like think about
if they're
professional
thinking
learning.
about doing it.
Yeah.
You got PLC time in a building, right? Who do you meet with in your professional learning communities? The math department, the English department, the social studies department. How much time is really spent talking about the trends in kids as a whole? And like, if they're talking in Heidi's ELA class, but I can't get them to say a word in math, well, what's Heidi doing that I can pull from? What strategies is she using? What word choice is she using? How is she creating a safe space? I just think there's so much there that we've kind of siloed ourselves out of.
Yeah, and and when you think about, I had like a random request for, I need something for my high school fine arts teachers to do it was election day. And like, well, I have so many things to say about this, but like, why are we just looking for that? Like, why isn't it not like more global things that we all can be working on? Like,
Agree.
We all can be working on SEL. Like, we can be working on non-curricular things, but we can also be talking and thinking about like how to incorporate, hands-on learning, which is done so much more in fine arts and, some of the technical areas that we just don't touch on at all in these other spaces. And so like, why are we doing that? Like, oh, I need something for this group of teachers and then something for this group of teachers. No, how about we think about the very few times a year we have when we're we're all off, right? Like coming up with some things that are like bridges between all of the different content areas, not just like, okay, you all go do your thing and we'll be over here doing our thing.
I
You
totally
know what
agree.
I
And
would love?
I am focused on math and ELA because that's my world right now.
Mhm.
But we're not even touching on the knowledge that like elective teachers, like you're
Mhm.
talking about, the best pockets and buildings of engaging kids are happening in electives.
Mhm.
It ask your PE teachers how to incorporate movement. What are you doing in PE class for movement breaks? Ask if they can incorporate content into theirs. Like I
Mhm.
totally agree with you. Like why are we saying like fine arts teachers and sadly elective and fine arts teachers and all of humanities teachers, they get left out of the professional learning
Mhm.
frequently, just kind of put in a corner because the district's like, we can't invest in that, we can only invest in English and math.
Right.
Yes.
Leave them
But what
alone.
I would love to go, like if I was working in a single district, I would love to have an art teacher or a music teacher lead a professional development on how math appears in their subject area, because like how awesome would it be if I actually knew how to leverage music in my fractions, because I don't know music. I can listen to it, but I don't know it, but I would love to be able to leverage that in my math class or anything with fine arts. I mean, symmetry, hello,
Mhm.
Exactly.
it's
I
all
totally
over the place. Yeah, we're totally missing out on that. Well, we should just run the world of education and then it would all be great.
I agree. And then the other thing that I have really been reflecting on is, again, I think there are so many ideas, you all. Something I grapple with a lot is
Mhm.
how many good ideas we have right now for how to make things better for students, but
Mhm.
that also apply directly to teachers, and we just ignore
Mhm.
them.
Mhm.
So when I think about the equity and access part of combining some of these professional learnings, that's what really gets like my heart pumping.
Mhm.
Because we talk so much about student funds of knowledge and building on
Yep.
student strength and what they know and harnessing that. And then we do none of
Mhm.
that for teachers. So again, you're a K-5 teacher. You're not a math person. I hate that word, but you know they all say it, right?
Yep.
You know their anxiety level headed into a
Mhm.
math professional learning.
Mhm.
I hear
Mhm.
it every time I'm leading them. Like, I'm not a math person. This is scaring me. What if they were
88%.
yeah,
88%
Oh,
of elementary school teachers, and the percentage grows as you move down the grade levels. But 80, like the youngest K1, 2, 88% of them have math
wild to
anxiety.
me. Exactly. So imagine how much of that anxiety we could not eliminate, but help
Mhm.
with heading into professional learning sessions
mhm,
if they knew they were going to be able to build on their funds of knowledge of teaching language arts and reading and all of
Mhm.
those things that they love, and use that to build their math capacity, their math teaching
Mhm.
capacity, their pedagogical skills, rather than just putting them in a room to be nervous all day because we're going to be doing math for 8 hours.
oh, do you mean asset-based learning?
Exactly. Like we do
Oh,
all the things we talk about for kids, but for all the work we do on research and education and what's best for kids, we do none of it for teachers.
Mhm. Well, but if you think, okay, so if you had told me, I got to think back how far it would be, like 20 years, okay, that I would be spending the next 20 years, because that was around the time that things started getting mathy for me. Um, so it had been like, 6 years of not mathy. If you had told me that I would be at primarily math conferences, like the last NCTE conference I went to was a really long time ago. And I mean, it was in LA, like when I lived out there. So like a very long time ago. And then I would spend the next 18 or so years like at math conferences. I would have laughed you just right. Like, no, you're like, you are crazy. That's not what I do. And like coming back to like, so today, people ask me what I do, and like they'll ask again, like, I'm sorry, what? You work at both? Why do you do that? Why why
Math person or a literacy person?
right. They're like, why would you no, this is NCTE. And I'm like, yeah, yes. Well, like there are some of us who do both, but it was just like this weird, like this back and forth. And I would never have signed up for a math conference as a high school English teacher. Like that
But
never.
that's so interesting just hearing. So what, before you arrived today, Heidi, Brooke was saying that there were 7,500 people at the NCTE conference today.
Mhm.
That's a stark difference from
Mhm.
what happens at NCTM.
Right.
I mean, do you guys know numbers? I know that it's not more than 2,000.
I thought the
Right?
last might have no more than 3. I think the last couple have been quite small.
25 to 3, I think, is the.
Okay. All right.
Mhm.
So even I'm
But I think
lowballing it.
too, I may have left you a message, Molly. I don't know. It could have been someone else. Other group of friends on my way back, but I was talking about like, so today I've interacted with college professors of English, of like solely English lit, world lit, blah, like hardcore lit folks. Then college professors of teachers of English or elementary, like, so the methods people, then a whole bunch of authors who are former teachers, current authors, or just authors who are writing for a particular, like, and they're there to talk about their book. So if you consider like that, how many mathematics professors, not professors of mathematics education,
Right.
show up at our conference, right? Like maybe the
Oh,
research
no, yeah.
conference, but not
Yeah.
not the Francis Sue is the only one I could think of off the top of my head, because like Mandy is primarily math education. She does mathematics too, but like that's seemed like is where her passion is.
Right.
And and so when I think about all those things, I'm like, okay, we have siloed the silo in math.
We really have.
Right. Because even if you like, how many elementary teachers do we see at NCTM or even we just came back from CMC South, like not that many. There are some, but they're not choosing to go to a math only conference if you are K-5.
Right. Because you're not only teaching math, which is why the joint conference was a great idea. Right. But I would like to, honestly, my dream world is let's have a joint conference that's just K-5 education and let's talk about good teaching, because that is when I got thrown into the deep end of the literacy world, and as fast as I was trying to learn, and there was lots to learn. Science of reading is deep. I read a lot of research papers, but at the same time, when it boils down to the teaching and the professional learning, good teaching is good teaching.
Good teaching. Yep.
And like, I think we overcomplicate that a lot by doing the silo thing. And I agree with you, Adi. Like we have siloed the silo in many ways in math ed and like focused on a very narrow focus, as opposed to, you're right, this is a very diverse crowd at this conference as far as their roles and what they're doing. And the sessions are that way also. The sessions are, I am overwhelmed selecting sessions because they run the gamut from author talks and not just curriculum author talks like we would have at a math conference, children's book author talks, to sessions on poetry and post-secondary and just humanity. And it really runs the gamut. You can see the breadth of the conference by looking at that.
And so one of the ones that I went to today was on mental health and the literacy crossovers, and like, so how we use mental health space to like have those conversations in an appropriate way, but also it was, one of the books talked about was written by a professor who is a trained therapist and then an English professor. And so like they've collated and curated books or, that speak to like these very deep and heavy issues that kids are dealing with. And so like, and then I'm thinking from my point of view, like in looking at it, I'm like, okay, well, there's also these ideas of we can't, in some spaces, you can't even talk about being nervous about being in a math class, right? Like that space is not safe enough, and the environment that's being created by the adult in the room is not safe enough to talk about like having some anxiety around the learning that you're doing. also for the teachers, right? So like I love and dislike doing things like, K-12 or even later elementary and up, because you get this like, well, we're the math experts from the high school folk, and like I don't have anything to learn from this kindergartner and teacher, right? I'm like,
if anybody wants to know how to learn, go into a kindergarten classroom.
Right.
I mean, not how to learn, how to teach.
Right. I'm like, and yet we've had lots of conversations about how kids don't talk and how they can't do this or they can't do that. And yet I'm seeing this kindergarten teacher like with non-readers yet, like they have not learned to read yet, but they're working collaboratively and, like talking to each other and using tools appropriately and like having these very deep mathematical conversations for small children and even some not small children. Like sometimes, it just blows you away. And yet you're struggling with them talking appropriately. And I'm like, one of these things is more developed than the other. Like, we just consider like the kids that we have in front of us, like we all have things to learn. And it's not just about, oh, it's nice to see what they should have done before they came to me and didn't do.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I wonder if there is a hierarchy within ELA, the same like how you were describing it, Heidi, as there is historically in math.
I don't know, but I'm going to ask some people the next few days and see if I can figure it out.
Good. You can get back to me, please.
To kind of off topic, but to your point, Heidi, one of the interesting ideas I've been kind of playing with is I would love to generate a list of like, I want a list from 3-5 teachers to K2 teachers telling them what are the 5 things you wish kids came to you with. And then I want 6-8 teachers to do the same and high school teachers to do the same. Because my guess is the lists are totally different. And I think that's a big part of where the issue is, right? Like if you ask a K2 teacher, what's the 5 most important math things that they go to 3-5 with? I would bet that they are different than what the 3-5 teachers would say the 5 most important things are. We have to be able to open up that dialogue and not from anybody being the end all be all. Nobody's the boss. Just because you teach the last grade doesn't make you the boss of the system. It's not a pyramid.
Right. I think a lot of this breakdown is because of time and how much. I remember when I was also a middle school math teacher, and I just remember just doing exactly what you said, Brooke, like wanting to meet with the at least the grade 5 teachers that were going to be pouring students into our school, at least meeting with them to see like, what have you been doing? How have you been doing it? Like, how can we leverage what you've done so that we can be more successful with them? And also, like, we wish that they knew this. Could you help us with that, please? But even just trying to get one single meeting in a year was like, seriously, we can't get this done? Like, everything is so regimented.
It definitely is. I mean, it's also all this to say that none of this is on the teachers, right? This is on those that control the structures and policies and design the professional learning and design the professional learning days and control the calendar and the time and the meeting schedule to fix. Teachers are doing all they can now and the best they can with what they have to work with and the resources they've been given. But I almost think we've just become too laser focused on the individual content pieces rather than the good teaching as a whole.
I wonder if this happened as a result of standardized testing or if it just was always kind of like that. I mean, who knows what it was like before we became teachers, right? We weren't around to know. We were just students at that time.
Yeah. Definitely true. I mean, when I was going through school, it was actually K-5 was a bit departmentalized. There was There
Oh.
were, certain instances where you would go to, one class would all go to a different teacher for math. They would change for math and reading. I'm assuming because that teacher had math anxiety and felt as though they could not teach the math, right? Which again goes back to this whole thing. Why are we using asset-based learning with them and building on that and all of those things? And you know, not to go down another rabbit hole, but the other thing I've been thinking a lot about, Heidi, to your point around, the 80, what'd you say, 88% of K-5 teachers have math anxiety. How much, because we don't use an asset-based lens with them, and we don't try to resolve that for them, how much of that rubs off on the children. I have a 2-year-old right now, and I've been really observing her and her class and what they feel about math and like math. And, I don't think any kid goes to kindergarten hating numbers and shape. We do that to them. We put that on them. And I wonder how much of that 88% plays into that.
Well, I mean, a lot, because if you have, I mean, it has shown to be like cyclical in that if you have math anxiety yourself, you are more likely to spend less time on math. So like if something goes, that's where you're cutting it from. And you tend to teach in more rote ways because you're so concerned. And it's often coming from like the best possible place, right? You're so concerned about doing it quote unquote wrong, like not doing the right thing, that you make those choices. And so like to teach it in the way that was taught to you, even though that was not a good way for you to learn. So it's like, it's this,
but it's what
this,
you know.
Yeah. It's what you know. And so, and you have like assigned expertise to that person and the way that you were taught in that way. And so,
well, and so back to the asset base thing. So that makes me think of like if you're a K-5 teacher, for example, and you're really good at helping the kids construct arguments in ELA class and break down, reading for understanding and knowing what's going on. If you can go to that teacher's classroom and say, I love how you're doing this in ELA. Let's talk about how you could bring that over to math. What would that look like? What would that feel like? I feel like we would get so much further than continuing to just sit them in 8-hour math trainings and hope something sticks.
Yeah.
And telling them all the things they're doing wrong. And everybody's a math person. You can be too. You shouldn't have anxiety, but we're never actually helping them fix it, right? We're not building on their funds of knowledge. We're not embracing their identity. We're not guiding them to deal with that identity. We are just saying, well, here's the curriculum. Like, you got to teach it. I can teach you the content. Hope for the best.
Yeah. Well, we've got to get there, right? I mean, that conference over the summer with NCTM and NCTE, that's a bridge. It's our first bridge.
What was interesting, and I think the three of us maybe talked about it at that conference, was still, and I'm so hopeful for year 2 it changes. Yeah. The majority of the sessions at that conference were still ELA sessions or math sessions. There were very few that blended both. And that is where I think we have to get. It's not enough just to bring teachers into space and say, you can go to a math session or you can go to an ELA session, to your point, Heidi. It's putting them all together so that no matter what your comfort area is, you will also be exposed to your push area.
Yeah. And it's hard because I know like a bunch of us put in things that were both. The thing that got accepted was the math only. And it was like such a, And so I was like, oh, okay. But it's this weird, like, how do we do that? Like, do people know like that? Do people know that it's going to,
they even have
their
strands?
Content is going to be okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm wondering, because, when we go to all these other conferences, there's strands and you have to fill out which strand yours belongs to. And so I'm curious this year what that will look like, because that was, I mean, unlike other conferences where you fill out your applications over a year in advance before it's happening, this was very quick. So Brooke, your idea that you were talking about earlier, I think would be a great session. Like, let's look, just taking maybe even 2, maybe even just two different strategies that you can leverage from math to ELA or ELA to math, and just say, look at, these are the same.
Agree. Well, and
they're the same. They're called something different, but they're the same. And this is how it looks in math, and this is how it looks in ELA. Like, what a great session that would be.
Well, and that was kind of my session last year. It was like 5 strategies you can use in any classroom, right, for multilingual learners.
Yeah, no, I loved it.
It was packed. Why? Not because of me, because teachers, I really do think, want that. They want to see that intersection, and they don't want to always just make the choice of. And because the other thing is, if given the choice, I mean, you all know I do the same thing. When I go to a conference and I start to get overwhelmed, as I inevitably will tomorrow, I start going to what's comfortable. I start saying, like, my brain is broken. I already know about that. I'm going to go because it'll be softer on my brain, right? And I mean, I don't fault anybody for that. I get overwhelmed and overstimulated like everybody. And so when everything is this dichotomy of like ELA or math, you're always going to go where your comfort level is. Once you start to get that productive, again, productive struggle. There's a math word, right? Like, how are we helping them productive struggle their way through it?
Yeah.
We make it very easy, I think, to opt out and say, go to another science of reading session. Like, that's your jam.
Right.
Yeah, totally. Yes. All right. Well, how can our listeners learn more about you, Brooke, and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm on Blue Sky now. You can find me on Blue Sky. That's my new thing. This is both my Twitter handle and my Blue Sky handle. You can also just, search my name on Facebook as well. And then I work for Open Up Resources. You can reach out to me there as well. You can fill out a form on the site or just look at my email address. I'd love to chat with you. I love to come to districts and do the work. I would love to bend your administrator's ear if you need me to about why they need to integrate math and ELA with professional learning, and would love to, I am definitely around at conferences, etc. If you're at NCTE, say hi. I'll see you at NCTM, the joint conference, all of those things. But I'm always open to chat. These conversations help me grow also. I'm at the beginning of my literacy era for sure. So I am always open to conversations to continue to push my thinking and to find more ways where we can work together and leverage the work, because we have a ways to go to get there.
Agreed. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us tonight, especially since you are not too far away from us, but you could be doing anything else.
Always a joy to talk to you too.
Oh, thank you. All right. Well, that was, again, super fun. And I hope that some administrators listen to this one, right? Because that's who needs to hear it, but this needs to be a bigger conversation for sure.
Agreed. And like opening up to conferences that allow that, and really encouraging people to go. Right. Like, so when there are joint opportunities, let's go and let's think about ways that people can have those conversations across different content areas, and vertically and horizontally, I would say, with similar grade levels, and then with grade levels that come before and after. So,
Agreed.
That, yeah. So we are breaking for a little bit.
I know. Well, the schedule has been weird because of all the conferences, and then Thanksgiving is so late. So anyways, we are going to be meeting back here for our last show of 2024 on December 12th with TJ Jemison. So that will undoubtedly be a great conversation. And if you want to take a look at our book, Math Activators, you can find that at Didex.
And until then, we hope that you keep math creative, curious, and inclusive for everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks. Bye-bye.